Okay, guys. So tonight we are in for a special treat. Now, I spoke to this gentleman a while back, a little over a year ago. We were working on the campaign for Graphic Samurai, the art of Dennis Cowan. And that was my introduction to Gizmo Press. And now we are here at the beginning of a brand new campaign for an anthology of sorts, also by Gizmo, a sort of labor of love. But here to talk with me about Grindhouse Comics is Gizmo Press founder, Mr. Michael Stradford. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, man. Really happy to see you and talk to you.
I'm excited to see you as well. When you reached out to me about this project, I was just on the heels of my interview with David F. Walker. And of course, David had just finished writing the book on Black film. We had a conversation about just sort of his love for Blaxploitation in that era of comics. And then I saw you posting teaser preview pages and posters, and I was like, oh, we're right here. We are right here in this same space. And
Right.
I got really excited about it. But for the audience, why don't we just talk about, one, what Grindhouse Comics is and sort of the inspiration behind it. But I guess before we do, I have to tell you guys, the audience, that Michael is like a cinephile's cinephile. One of the great pleasures of, being close enough to be Facebook friends with Michael is reading through his film reviews. Like, I'm not the biggest movie buff. I kind of go for whatever the newest MCU movie is, and I've got like my childhood favorites and sort of, I don't know. I feel like most of us Black kids could have like a, maybe not a PhD, but at least a master's in like Black cinema, because that's just what came home every weekend from the video store. But when you read Michael's reviews, it's like, no, this dude knows what he's talking about. And like the critiques they're honest, they're fair, but it's like they make you excited. Like, okay, if somebody that knows this much about film says this movie's good, I'm going to give it a shot. And I don't know. I don't know what else you do with those besides putting them on Facebook, but I love them. Thank you for posting them.
Well, thanks. That's really nice. That's really nice of you. I've got a lot of friends over the years that always they know I see almost everything that comes out because I've just been a movie junkie since I was a kid. And so they're always asking me, what did you think of this? What did you think of that? Why'd you think this way? Why'd you think that way? So I started writing reviews to post kind of as a way to just keep in touch with friends, and, people seem to really respond to it. So I try to do it pretty often. Usually if I see films that I don't like, I kind of stay away from reviewing because I'm not really interested in trying to tear anybody down. But every once in a while, there's a film that's so egregious, I feel like people need to know before they spend their hard-earned money. But for the most part, if I can't find anything good to say about a film, I probably just won't talk about it online.
That's fair. Now, you've got, quite a history in film and television. I guess for the audience, like, who are you, sir?
What is it? Jack of all trades, master of none. I had a circuitous route in my career. I started off in radio. I was a DJ in the Midwest in several markets: Cincinnati, Detroit, St. Louis. And then I became program director. I programmed a radio station in Houston, which got me to Los Angeles. I launched a radio station here. Unbeknownst to me, Quincy Jones had his eye on what I was doing at the radio station. So after 2 years, he snatched me out of the radio station, and I went to do A&R for his record company, Quest Records, for about 3.5 years. It was Tevin Campbell, the Winans, Keith Washington, a number of other artists. And then following that, I went to work for Sony, Columbia TriStar Home Entertainment, and I ran the division that created all the special features on the DVDs and Blu-rays, documentaries, deleted scenes, audio commentaries. And, we did stuff like Spider-Man, Lawrence of Arabia, Boys in the Hood, literally thousands of titles. And then I went to Warner Brothers and did a similar job until 2023. And I've just been, doing Gizmo, just kind of doing stuff that I want to do. Because as time went on, the movies got worse and worse, and it was harder to get excited about the film. So, fortunately with Warner Brothers, one of my last films was The Batman.
Mm.
And we won a couple of awards for the content that we produced to support that. But then my last film at Warner Brothers was Black Adam, which is just a terrible disappointment. So, I felt like it was time for me to start doing stuff that I could be passionate about and could really put my time and attention into.
Man. So creating the special features for the DVD, which I don't know, somebody's going to stumble on this interview like in 10 years and be like, what does any of that mean? Right. But, but I remember the first time I saw a DVD, because we had VHS players when I was a kid. And I don't know if people can imagine a time where a DVD player was expensive, but that was a thing. So the first time I experienced a DVD, ironically, it was the home release of Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. We were visiting a family member in Virginia, and my cousin Tony was a CIA operative. All I know is that he worked for the CIA, but like he's like the first family member I knew that had like a Mercedes and a really cool house, and like in his basement he's got this whole home theater setup. And so we watched Spider-Man on this big home theater setup, and I remember the special features. I remember the animations that you would see, like to get to the special features in the menu and chapter selection and all that. But anyway, all that to say, now we're in the streaming era, and those special features are often not found anywhere. What do you do with that? Like how do you reconcile that in your mind? Like we did all this work and maybe people aren't seeing it.
Well, a lot of that stuff winds up on YouTube. you know. Years later, most of those featurettes wind up on YouTube. There's a lot of boutique labels, a number of them out of the UK, like Indicator and Arrow, that are doing just unbelievable packages of films with special features. So it's more boutique now.
Mm-hmm.
But, I find that today's generation of filmmakers are quick to say that the special features really help them get a handle on the kind of filmmakers that they want to be and to understand the making and the process of the film. So I don't feel like it was wasted. It was wasted effort. I think it served its place and served its time and still does. As a matter of fact, this just arrived. This was a Kickstarter campaign that I participated in. This film called Riverbend, and it was a little scene film directed by the guy that did American Ninja and a bunch of Cannon movies, and it gave Steve James one of his few starring roles. And I guess it came and went quickly in 1989, but they found a master somewhere, and they did this incredible presentation, and it's loaded with special features. It's like carrying on the tradition of what DVD and Blu-ray was. So it's not dead. It's just taking a different form, I guess.
Yeah, my friend Jake from another YouTube channel, The Brave and the Boys, he works at like I think the company's called Upscale Audio, but he works like a high-end audio place out on the West Coast. And so he sends us pictures of like his setup, and he's got these amazing speakers. I'm like, I feel like, you hear about different stories of going into different record label offices, and it's like, no, Pharrell had the craziest speakers I've ever seen, and we just sat down and listened to music and so on. And that's what I imagine it's like going and being in Jake's living room, right? But he goes out faithfully and buys like those steelbook releases and goes and looks for like the Criterion collection and stuff like that. And it's like it makes me like, I'm like, all right, I already have my 1,000 records in storage. I've got all these books surrounding me. I don't need another physical media obsession, but like then stuff gets disappeared, and you buy stuff on digital, and they're like, oh no, we're not going to have it up here anymore. And it's like, but I paid for it, and it makes you want to start buying that stuff up, like at least the stuff you love.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know if I can really move this so you can see it, but um, there is. Let's see, this cabinet. You
Oh
can't
yeah.
really see that well, but the first three shelves are all DVDs and Blu-rays, primarily Blu-rays, but they're limited editions, versions of films that don't get the kind of love that they ought to get.
Mm.
Or in some cases, like a lot of John Woo's films have been remastered into 4K and they look better than they've ever looked. And they have incredible special features. So yeah, it's a dangerous habit, but it's one worth having, I think.
Yeah.
But real quick, if you got a minute, tell you a quick Spider-Man story since you mentioned that.
Okay.
That was the first title that I worked on at Sony that I really had a vested interest in. I wanted to do what hadn't been done in the DVD market to that point. I wanted to spend as much time on the Spider-Man comic book origins as we do on the making of the movie. So one disc was all about the making of the film, all behind the scenes stuff, and the other disc was comic book stuff. So we talked to Joe Quesada, we talked to John Byrne, we talked to Axel Alonso, number of known Marvel creators. And I put together a presentation, took it to Sam Raimi. He signed off on it. I took it to him again before we started shooting everything because when I first took it to him, they hadn't started shooting the movie yet. So I took it to him again when they were about halfway through because I felt like better to be safe than sorry because once you start the filmmaking process, sometimes your mind changes and this and that. So he signed off on it a second time. So we produce all the content. It comes out great. Send it to him. He tries to get me fired. He told my boss that I was giving away all the secrets of the movie, and my boss said, "Yeah, but you signed off on it twice. There's no bait and switch. He just did what you agreed to." So uh, as a result, I can't watch Spider Man. As, as much as I love that movie, after that went down, I can't watch it and enjoy it anymore.
Wow. Man, that's
Yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah.
crazy.
But that's the business.
Right. But never mind. I won't say that. I'll save that for offline. But yeah, so okay, in such a storied career, obviously we gotta get focused here, but I can't
Hmm.
just let you skate by being handpicked by Quincy Jones to work for Quest. Right. Like
Mm.
I don't know how you sum up that experience, but I guess maybe what is the most interesting or unexpected lesson you learned from the man or the dude himself?
Uh, that he's just a human being.
Mm.
That um, there were a lot of highs and there were a few unexpected lows. I'm glad I had the experience, but uh, yeah, there were some rough days. There were
Mm.
some rough days. Um, but, fortunately, before he passed, we got together a few years before he passed. I was working on a book on Miles Davis, and I went over to his house to interview him. It was supposed to be a 20-minute interview, and he had me there for like 4.5 hours, and it was a great time. It was a great time. So, it was an amazing experience. I mean, to be sitting at home on a Saturday and you get a call from Quincy, Mike, you got to fly down to Winston-Salem and convince Maya Angelou to do this album. Like, what album? It's like, well, I want to do an album where she, records her poems and then we put music to them. I'm like, okay, well, why am I going? That she's your friend. Like, yeah, but you go down and close the deal. And so I wound up spending 4 days at Maya Angelou's house, and she cooked for me every day. She was a gourmet cook, you
Mm.
know. So there were experiences because of Quincy that there's no way I would have had otherwise. So
Man,
I'm grateful for that.
that's amazing. So the music nerd in me has to ask one more question, right? Like,
Mm.
how would you describe the day-to-day job of an A&R?
Well, I don't know what it's like now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I got out of it. I was with Quincy from 92 to 96. So back then, it was a lot of traveling back and forth to New York because New York was really where uh, the scene was happening for Black music. Hip hop hadn't really broken through to the level that it did in just a couple of years. But, at that point in time, you go to New York to meet with producers like Puffy and Rodney Jerkins and, a bunch of these other guys. You spend a lot of time at studios. You spend a lot of time with um, song publishers, listening to songs, being pitched artists, meeting with artists, trying to find songs for artists once you've signed an artist to the label, trying to encourage art like Tevin. Tevin didn't want to write, and I really pushed him to learn to write songs. I said, that's an extra revenue stream if you've got a couple writing credits on an album that sells a couple million records. Um, so it was back then, it was you just did whatever you needed to do to try to find artists, to try to keep them on track, help them get clarity on the kind of career that they wanted to have, remind them of the kind of career that they said they want to have so that they continue to put the work in. You know, it was a good experience and a good time.
Yeah. I think, I guess for context, before I was ever in comics, I used to run or host a music marketing education channel. And so I had a podcast where we spoke with music industry veterans to explain different roles, responsibilities, and strategies for music industry success. And I think, there was a time where like A&R meant like dude with blank check waiting to discover me, right? But I think for purpose of this conversation, the job of an A&R is not all that unlike the job of like a comic book editor, right? Like there is part of it that's like
True.
talent scouting, part of it that's project managing, like having an idea for what the creative, goals of the label are, or at this point, the publisher, right? And saying, you know what, like this songwriter does really great stuff that might work with this voice, right? Like we can get them together. Right. I don't think people know how much of an industry, the music industry is, especially like once you get to like that top level, music publishing. Like there's people whose jobs it is to like lock people up in contracts and say, all right, you sit in the studio and write songs, and I'm gonna listen to these songs and be like, okay, I hear Rihanna on this. Let me get Rihanna on the phone. Hey, come cut this song. Let's see what works. And so that's how you end up with all these stories of like, oh, I had this one first and this and that. And it is not necessarily as glamorous as you might think. Like your favorite artist doesn't just sit in the studio, come up with a song and, boom, we've got gold. It's like there's a lot of iterations and stuff. But, comparing that to something like comics that, can have just as much chaos going on around it, but often feels just as intimate as, say your favorite R&B songs.
Right.
But it makes me feel like someone like you is uniquely suited to the role that you're in now, where you're seeking out these creative passion projects, but also you've got a deep Rolodex and you know who to call to make it happen. And so with that said, we got to talk about Grindhouse and, how this became the next project for Gizmo and how you're bringing it all together.
Okay. Gizmo originally wasn't going to be the next project. The next project was going to be Fargo, the second Fargo graphic novel. We did one called Fargo Hell on Wheels that Howard Chaykin adapted. Did a great job. And then he wrote the script for the second one, Panama Gold. And Butch Geis had signed on to illustrate that. And then Butch got sick, and sadly, he passed shortly thereafter. So it took me quite a while to try to find the right artist for the book. So in the meantime, I was thinking about another project, and that wound up being Grindhouse. And Grindhouse Comics is something that I just got the name because I couldn't believe it was available, you know. So I got grindhousecomics.com. I've had it for 4 or 5 years, and I said at some point I'll have a reason to do something with it. So I had written a screenplay when I worked for Quincy shortly after I left working for Quincy, and it was my idea of what Shaft would feel like in the present day. Not a remake of Shaft, but I was thinking of, young Black kids in the 90s. They didn't have the experience of having somebody like Shaft the way I did when I was a teenager in the 70s. So I wrote a screenplay based on what I knew, and it was, essentially a guy who was a fixer, um, who was hired to find this missing singer who was his ex-girlfriend. And he winds up teaming up with her current boyfriend, who's a character named Money. And I was thinking of them as kind of a Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, but modern day and in New York City. And I wrote the script, got a lot of interest, got close to being made a couple times, and it didn't. So I just put it in a drawer. Michael Jai White was attached to it, and he always liked it. Um, and so a few years ago, he had reached out to me and asked me if he could do a pass at a rewrite because he had some ideas. So he did the rewrite, um, changed quite a bit of it, changed the tone of it, made it more of a comedy, um, but sold it, got it made. So he changed the name of the script, as the script was called Raine. The character's name is Raine, and he changed it to Trouble Man, which I didn't really understand because it's got nothing to do with Trouble Man.
Because that was a film that already came out.
Yeah, it's not a remake, it's not a sequel, but whatever. So and he made a lot of choices. He bought the script so he could do what he wanted to do with it, and I felt like it was kind of my story, but it really wasn't. But I retained the graphic novel rights. So one day my wife and I were talking, and she's like, "You got the graphic novel rights. Why don't you do a graphic novel?" So I said, "Yeah, why didn't I think of that?" So I worked with a guy named Anthony Rella, who did an adaptation of the screenplay into a graphic novel script. And then, man, I went through this laborious chore of trying to find an artist. I tried like 5 young guys that were really talented, but they either couldn't deliver on time, couldn't deliver at all, bad communication skills. What they submitted online wasn't really how their day-to-day workflow went. And so I lost a lot of time there. And then I finally found this guy, Ruli Akbar. Um, he lives in Jakarta, young artist, really talented guy. And, he nailed it. So while he was working on it, I thought about a couple other ideas that I had kind of laying around. Like David Walker and Dennis Cowan and I had come up with a character. And I was like, well, maybe I could do a short of that character kind of as a launching pad for something else. And then I took that idea and started applying it to other characters and ideas that I had. So I thought, okay, if the banner is Grindhouse, and Grindhouse movies are films from the 70s that were low budget, action packed horror movies, blaxploitation movies. If you go to the movies to see Superfly, you might see the trailer for The Mechanic and White Lightning and Coffee and all these other things. So I thought, okay, if Raine is going to be the main feature, so to speak, in the graphic novel, then I can do these short stories and introduce these other characters and use these short stories kind of as trailers or previews of coming attractions. So those other stories run anywhere from 6 to 14 pages. Um, the Raine story is 92 pages. So the whole book will be about 230 pages when it's all done. And it'll be a 9 by 12. It'll be an oversized book. Joe Jusko did one cover. Frank Cho did another. We're going to debut those at our San Diego Comic-Con panel on Thursday. So I'm really excited about getting that out into the world. And I wanted to, because I've supported a lot of Kickstarter campaigns. And one of the things that has always been important to me is fulfillment. You know, unfortunately, there have been a handful of projects that I've supported that have never fulfilled. Um, and I thought, with Gizmo, we've been able to deliver everything that we promised, either on time or early. And so for Grindhouse, given that I'm a new writer, these are new characters, I wanted to make the barrier to entry as low as possible. So I wanted to have the book completely finished before I did the campaign. So the book is done. My designer is just tweaking a couple things, but every story's been written, drawn, colored, lettered, edited. And so, if once the campaign goes, if it's successful, we will immediately give files to our printer in China. He'll do what he's going to do, and hopefully we'll have the book back before too long. So the idea was, I'm asking you to take a bet on me, but I want to show you that if you're interested in this kind of work, I want to show you that I respect the risk that you're willing to take, and I want to have a book that exists in the world. So you aren't buying a concept. You can, like, when the page launches, every character's got at least 1 or 2 pages of finished art on that page.
I will tell you guys, I've backed a campaign from Gizmo before. Again, we talked about it, the Graphic Samurai, the art of Dennis Cowan, which I believe was also 9x12.
Yep.
And first of all, that book came packed beautifully. Mine I got the dust jacket edition with the signed book plate or remarked book plate. And I also ordered a piece of original art, and all of my stuff came together. No damage on any of it. So I have no concerns with backing this campaign. I get your point, because a lot of times people go to Kickstarter to say, hey, if you give us money, then we can go and make this thing. And that's not what we're getting this time around, right? It's, hey, I made this thing, and if you would like it, pledge this dollar amount, and we'll print it out, or we'll get it printed and sent to you. But yeah, so you've done stellar campaigns in the past. I don't expect this will be any different just because it's new content.
Thanks. I mean, I'm a collector myself. I'm a consumer myself. You can't see my office, but every wall has got bookcases, original art, just all kind of stuff, because that's what I'm into. So for me to have an opportunity to create something that'll go in somebody's library, go on their bookshelves, I really want it to be a quality project. I want them to feel like, yeah, this was worth the money. This was worth the wait, whatever it is. So, I take a lot of pride in putting together the best presentation that I can. And it's always nice, like when I meet people at cons, they always, particularly on Graphic Samurai, people have been very, very complimentary about, Jason Medley's design, because he did a great job on the book. Dennis's extensive interview, the quality of the paper, the weight of the paper, that's all important. And we did have a few cases where there were some damaged books that were beyond my control, but once the supporter let me know, gave me the information, we just got to correct the copy right out to them. So, I don't believe in dragging my feet about, taking care of books when they're damaged, because, I don't want to wait. I get my book, I order my book, I want it, so I want it right.
The other sort of underrated part of the Graphic Samurai book is the quality of the binding, right? Like the way the book lays when it's open, and you don't have the gutter loss, but you also don't have like the fear that some of the pages are going to pop out. Like,
right.
I don't know. I'm a book nerd, but it's great when you have a book that you don't feel like you have to hold so gingerly. Because some of these books, it's
Yeah,
like, they had the print run, it's not going to get another one, and you're almost afraid to take it off the shelf and enjoy it. Because it's like, oh, maybe I
right.
got like 4 or 5 reads before it starts to split or the glue starts to come undone. But no, Graphic Samurai is holding up well, and I go through it so often. But it's just there's still a lot
Well,
to enjoy about it.
it's fun. It's funny you mentioned that because when I started researching, well, our first project was Zoop. With Fargo was through Zoop, and Zoop handled the fulfillment, so we didn't really deal with the printers. But when I decided for our next book that I wanted to take it on myself, I wound up talking to about 20, 25 different printers from China, Korea, Mexico, and even Canada. And part of my conversations back and forth was like, okay, the people that buy these books read these books and they go back to these books. And I need a book that can withstand that. And a number of the printers don't want to send you physical copies to approve. They want you to approve off of digital.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really important to me that I physically have a sample copy that I can feel. I can see the binding. I can see if the paper stock is right. You can tell how sturdy the spine is. And the printer that I've been using for the last few books and we'll use on this one, has just done a spectacular job. I'm really happy with them.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll get out of book binding nerd territory for a second, and I want to just talk about the concept of the grindhouse. You talked about it a little bit, just like that
Right.
sort of, I guess for me, what comes to mind is like blaxploitation films, stuff that I used to watch like
Mm-hmm.
in my black film studies classes. Like you might
Right.
have an uncle that was really cool and like had copies of that stuff, and then like that kind of spawns Tarantino and other stuff that comes later.
Mm-hmm.
But why Grindhouse? Why that being the inspiration? And maybe what are some of your favorite films that kind of serve as influences?
Well, I grew up in Cleveland in the Midwest, and there was a movie theater called the Hippodrome, and it was a massive downtown theater that was just a beautiful room. But it showed all the blaxploitation movies for like $2. And as a kid, you walk through the lobby, and there's a whole wall of just these incredible movie posters, generally blaxploitation posters, that are flanked by stills of each of the films. So every Sunday almost, I go to the movies and I'd see one of these films, and it was so unlike anything else that I had seen at the time because aside from blaxploitation movies, it was like Elvis Presley and James Bond, and I love Bond and Elvis, whatever. But to see black people on screen doing their thing is like you know, Sidney Poitier was not a guy I could ever imagine seeing in my neighborhood. I lived in a lower middle class black neighborhood.
Mm.
Jim Brown was like on Mount Olympus. He didn't even seem human, and those were the main black actors at that time. So when blaxploitation exploded, you saw all kind of black people and black people that you could imagine seeing in the corner store. You could imagine driving down the street. You could imagine bumping into. And it just made the experience different because it felt real, but at the same time fantastic. But in a grounded way, if that makes any sense. So I saw Shaft in 71 and I wasn't a teenager yet. I was still a preteen, but I saw Shaft, man, and it just blew my mind. And when I finally got a chance to meet Richard Roundtree, he was everything I had hoped he would be. He was just a super guy. Um, but I've always felt like the experience of seeing those films with an audience, there's a camaraderie, there's a like-mindedness even with people that you don't know when you're watching these movies, and you want to see Superfly figure out how to get away from the man. You want to see Pam Grier get her revenge and handle her business. It's just a different kind of animal. And it's like the movies were so low budget that studios didn't really pay much attention. So the filmmakers got to make the kind of movies that they wanted to make. Whereas now, unless you have control, um, unless you're a guy like Ryan Coogler, who's amassed enough goodwill and enough box office that they'll pretty much let him do what he wants to do. That's generally not the case. So to see films like Shaft, The Mac, Slaughter, Claudine, Abby, JD's Revenge, there was just Blackula. There was just such a breadth of film for a young Black guy in Cleveland to see that, I just took it all in. And the joy of that experience never left me. So, when I wrote my screenplay, it was really a salute to Shaft. And I just thought that, a comic book audience might enjoy kind of just a modern day crime story with a cool leading man at the center of it, because I think about um, Power, the whole Power 50 Cent thing that he's got going on Stars. Uh, there's some really good stuff on there, but all the protagonists are criminals.
Mm.
They're drug dealers, they're gangsters, what. And it's like, how about having somebody that's not that? Somebody that's cool and rough and tough, but they aren't selling drugs, they aren't tearing their community down. And so that was kind of the thrust behind what ultimately became Raine. And I just thought the Grindhouse was a good umbrella to put all these things under because they're all of a type. They're action oriented. There are different types of action. One guy, Dakota, is a kind of a Western soldier of fortune. Artemis Taylor is a Black woman that lives in Compton. She used to be an MI6 agent. She comes back home to Compton. Bull is a mass crime fighter from the 30s in San Francisco in the Bay Area. Strike is a martial artist, kind of an underground martial artist. That was something I developed with Israel Adesanya in mind. He was middleweight champ of the UFC at the time. So they all kind of cover different areas, but hopefully, the connecting tissue is that it's all kind of rooted in fun and good action. If you don't like the story, it's all my fault because I wrote them, But I've got a good team of artists and colorists and letterers, and I'm really happy with how it turned out.
Speaking of artists, you put out a teaser piece, sort of pin up that Kanan White did, and gosh, man, that poster is amazing, right? Like, and people that read like Black indie books, of course, are familiar with Kanan White because it seems like he's doing variants for a little bit of everybody. But like, he's in demand for a reason. I'm gonna put this on the screen. I'll edit this in so you guys can see it. But it's just like it invites you in. I think, me being a '90s kid, I obviously missed out on Blaxploitation, except for like through academic study or like whatever, friends and family may have had. Like I said, my uncle was the cinephile in our family, and that's definitely where some of that knowledge comes from. But speaking to people who were there, kids going to the theater at the time, you all kind of have the same sort of, I don't know, star in your eyes describing it, right? And the sense I get is like, you know what? Like, these were our heroes. This was like our Batman, right? And I think it's cool because that era obviously like inspires the stuff that I grew up in, right? And it's like, if not so much in like in the form, but I don't think you get people like John Singleton, the Hughes brothers, even Spike Lee to a degree, without this Grindhouse and Blaxploitation era. And people who are like, oh wait, I can pick up a camera, I can tell our stories, right? And it's like, I think if anything, your era, or I shouldn't say it like that, but that era of film kind of ushers us into the community, ushers us into the neighborhood. And it's like, okay, well, now while we're here, let's tell even more real and grounded stories. And that's where you get like that sort of renaissance of the 80s and 90s. And, you know, now we're in a whole different space where, I don't know, I feel like being an adult now, I didn't realize like how good we had it when I was a kid. I feel like 90s into the 2000s was like peak Black entertainment. Like we had a whole TV channel called Black Entertainment Television, and we had, you know, all the movies, and, you know, everybody you wanted to be in life was Black, from Michael Jordan to Michael Jackson to Jay-Z to the Wayans
Right.
brothers and Martin and so on and all and all and all. But it's just different to like see and experience all of that and realize that like a lot of the seeds of that were planted here. And I don't know, there's something about this set of posters that just really kind of encapsulates that. And it's like, makes it real. I can imagine being like a kid, like seeing that poster, like, okay, I don't know what this is about, but I want in.
Right. Yeah, you know, I think that there's like today the stakes are just so much higher now, you
Mm,
know. You know, during the 90s, during the period that you were talking about, I mean, stakes are always high, but I think back then there felt like more of an opportunity, more of a chance of possibility. It didn't feel like uh, you know, you were completely under the thumb of the government. Um, you know, it just felt like there was more opportunity. Right now, it feels like fight to survive, you
mm,
know, more so than fight to thrive. And hopefully it won't stay that way. But, you know, the stakes are just different now. Um, yeah, the 90s and 2000s were a great time. You know, there was a great time creatively. And even now it's a great time creatively, but there's just so much more weight to it.
mhm,
You know, it's just not as like I tell my son it's too bad he's 27. It's too bad you can't just be 27.
mm.
You know, there are things that you have to consider and keep in mind that you shouldn't have to, but you do now because these are just the days and times that we live in, you know. Um, and you know, one of my hopes with Grindhouse is that when it's done, somebody picks it up, the quality that we put into it in terms of the presentation, in addition to the stories, will be such that it'll inspire somebody to do something just as Black but better, you know. Because I'm really pushing for this to have a yeah, I want this to fit in France. I want it to fit in Italy in bookstores, you know, internationally. Um, but I don't want it to be the only one. I don't want it to be the only one of its kind.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, I don't know, we are in, I don't know, the last 6 months has been interesting, right? Especially as it relates to like Black people in comics. There's been a lot of conversation about representation and like who needs to be supported and so on. But one thing that I feel like is a positive of all of this is like there are more people looking for Black stories than it feels like ever were before, at least in comics.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people there to meet that demand. You know, we've got people like you and the projects that you put out through Gizmo, right? We've got people like my man Danny, who does Ace Blade. There's this kid that does Impound Comics. Like there's all sorts of sort of little pocket universes that people can dive into and get their fix. And I think what a project like this does, right? Like when someone as well connected, well respected, and just creatively passionate as you puts together a project that, you know, feels deserving of like being on the shelf, right? Like whether you are a collector of vinyl and music, you're a collector of comics, you're a collector of like coffee table and art books, like when you put out a project that feels as prestigious as this, it kind of serves the same purpose as to like show people, oh wait, this is possible with my characters. All right, how do I get there? And I think that's important.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. I agree. I was thinking I would like to take a minute to acknowledge a mistake that I made
Hmm.
regarding this project. I tried to run an ad. I had never done a meta ad before, and I did a meta ad, and I used a panel that Ruli drew. Chris Sotomayor colored it. It's a great panel. I think I sent it to you. It's the horizontal shot of Raine. He's like on a rooftop,
Okay.
and so I took the panel and I had ChatGPT build the ad using that illustration.
Hmm.
And so the ad went up, and all of a sudden I started getting these kind of hostile emails from folks. That's AI slop. That's not real. Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, wait a minute. This isn't AI. This was my man drew this.
Hmm.
But then I realized, I guess because it was processed through chat, I guess there's some kind of designation or something that it's AI. And then one guy said, if this was real, you would be announcing who the creators are and this and that. And you didn't announce any of that. And the plan was to do that at Comic-Con,
Hmm.
because I just felt like there was so much information to try to get out initially. This is what the concept was. There's 8 stories, 8 characters you've never heard of. And then to also put on top of that, there's 20 creators. It's just too much information to try to get out. So last week, I did 2 separate posts that announced and introduced all of the creators on all of the books, and it's cool. And the only people, there was only like a handful of people that hit me up about that ad, but it just kind of threw me. So I just in the event any of those guys are watching, get it. Sorry it tweaked you, but hopefully you get it now and all is good.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting era with AI, right? Like there's rightfully so. I think there are people who have concerns over just whether or not AI is ethical, whether it's stealing from artists. In a lot of cases, we're learning that these models are being trained on art without any sort of permission, compensation. And it's like, the stuff is advancing so quickly. I can legit be like, all right, give me Superman in the style of Dennis Cowan. And then it'll look like Dennis drew it. And it's like, that's crazy. But because of that, and also some of the environmental concerns, there's a lot of like, I don't want to say fear, because saying fear makes it sound like it's misplaced or the aggression is, but there's a lot of kind of vitriol that comes with any sort of use of AI. And then combine that with the fact, like, let's say I give AI like all the base stuff, and it's like, I just want a flyer, like tell them, birthday party starts at 3:00 or whatever, right? And you will get a flyer that looks like so many other flyers, like the same sort of fonts and stuff. So then that becomes the identifier, and people just assume, okay, everything in here is AI.
Right.
And it's just like, nah, like they're talented artists. And so it's like, I don't know. We can litigate that somewhere else. I don't know what the place is for AI. Like if AI just creates the frame that you put on your project, like, is that bad? I don't know. But
Yeah, I mean, it's not worth it to me, because there's nothing about my book that's AI, so it's just not even worth the trouble. I thought I was just saving myself a little time with the ad, but I've got a number of really good friends that are artists, and I feel for the anxiety that they have about AI and how AI is invading what they do and potentially costing them money. So I'm definitely not trying to subscribe to supporting that.
for sure. Yeah, I work in my day job is in healthcare industry. And what I will tell you is AI is like everywhere. And it is scary, the mandates that we are getting from the government to like try to figure out how to use technology to replace what is ultimately like work that humans would be doing. And they know that it's going to make mistakes. They just feel like the mistakes are cheaper to fix than it would be to hire somebody to do it the right way, slowly. And so
Mhm.
it's scary. It is scary for sure. And you're right. I think you've got enough talented friends and, you know, resources and whatnot, like to not even have to worry about any of that. And I would never want, you know, that to overshadow or to put a spot on the work that you guys have done. Because
Mhm.
I mean, the campaign's in pre-launch right now. By the time this interview goes live, it'll be live, and you can go to comicsaredope.com/grindhouse to check out the campaign. But I mean, when you see these pinups, when you see these posters, there's a whole slew of posters that are directly homaging these different classic Grindhouse films. There's a Train Robbers homage. There's a Shaft in Africa homage. There's an original Shaft homage. Like, so there's a lot in here, and it's like AI can't do what these artists are doing. Not with the
And
heart.
you know, the coolest part about that was the artists were all excited to do it because
Mm,
it was so different from what they're generally called to do. So like Colton Worley, who painted several, he painted Dambala, he painted Dakota, and he painted one other. You know, he was really excited to apply his skills to those posters, and he did an amazing job. And I got hip to him because David Walker used him for Monster of Blackenstein. He
yeah.
did a pinup for him that was really cool. And but all of the artists, you know, were like, "Man, this is so different." And so they did the illustration, and I built the rest of the you know, the copy and everything.
And yeah, that Monster of Blackenstein project is great. I've actually got
Yeah,
my
yeah, I
roll
love
ups
that.
sitting over there. But Joe Jusko, who did the A cover for that, is doing the cover for
Hmm.
this book. So if you liked that project by David F. Walker, chances are, I mean, you would have liked this anyway, just because it's kind of in this, it's playing in the same genre. But there's also some of the same creatives involved. So definitely a big
And
fan.
David did the forward. He wrote the forward to my book.
Of course he did. That makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
awesome. So yeah, this campaign, you know, it launches August 11th. I said it's live now. There's a good chance this comes out like the week before, but I try to make sure these go up when the campaign is active. That way people can take action on it.
Great.
But with all that said, what do you hope people take away from this? Like once they have the book in their hands and they get to like pour over the art and you know be nerds and look at the nice sewn binding and all that too. What do you hope they come away with?
You know, I hope they come away with a book that's worth picking up more than once because there's a lot to it. You know, there's the stories, there are several articles. I did an article called The Long Road to Raine that just kind of walks you through the whole process of from writing the screenplay and all the trials and tribulations to ultimately getting Raine done. There was an article about Grindhouse movies, recommendations of Grindhouse movies, books, and comics. Um, you know, there's a pinup section about 30 different illustrations, you know, so it's a dense package. And, you know, if you pick it up and feel like, wow, this was just a good time. I enjoyed this and have some, I'm going to pass it on for somebody to read, then that'll be it. And hopefully, you know, people like the characters and would like to see them again in some other form. One character that Dennis, David, and I created called Yaz was an idea of taking Yasuke and turning him into an immortal samurai. And so this first story is set in the 60s, and this full length story that I had in mind for him keeps him in the 60s, and I think could be really cool. So I would love to have an opportunity to draw that. And Giancarlo Bernal, who drew it, who also drew Crescent City Monsters and Keisha Monster Eater. Um, he wants to draw the full length, and I'd be over the moon if I could work that out and have him draw the full length. Yes.
Man. So this Grindhouse Comics Presents, it sounds like in your vision, it's a line and we keep revisiting. With that, I don't want to ask you to spoil anything, but what's the one project out of here that you can't wait to revisit again?
Uh, Artemis Taylor,
Mm,
troubleshooter. That's my female character. Um, she's a lot of fun, and I think there's a lot to do with her. Um, I think she'd be a great movie. Because there's really we don't have a Pam Grier right now. We don't have anybody really rocking it like that. And this character is built for that kind of world. Um, yeah, I think she'd be great. And I think Patina Miller from Raising Canaan would be ideal. She'd be ideal casting.
nice. All right. Well, before Michael gives up too many more trade secrets, I'll I'll cut this off here. But like I said, you can visit the campaign. Go to comicsaredope.com/grindhouse. That'll take you to the Kickstarter page where you can back this. And listen, I was all for Michael's speech about people sharing their books with other people and letting you get a peek at it and all that type of stuff. Right? No, my brother, you got to get your own. So go to comicsaredope.com/grindhouse, back the campaign so you can get your own copy and not be drooling over mine. And we will see you in another conversation real soon. Until then, stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today. Peace.